Do all things without complaining and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain or labored in vain.
Don't stop me if you heard this one. There's a man named George. George owned an apartment building, and he had just finished putting a second story on this apartment building. It had a brick exterior. And after he had finished that second story, he found that he had a number of bricks left over. He was standing there looking at the ground, wondering, how do I get these extra bricks down to the ground intact so that they could be used in another construction? And he happened to see a 55-gallon barrel sitting on the ground. And he thought, okay, I've got a very strong rope here. I'm going to tie a rope around that barrel, put it through a pulley up here on the second level, hoist that barrel up, fill it with the bricks, and lower it down. So he went down and tied the rope around the barrel. He had put it around the pulley, let it down, tied it around the barrel. Then to secure it, after he'd pulled it up, he went ahead and tied it to a tree. So the barrel is now on the second level. The rope is tied to a tree. He goes up, loads the bricks into the barrel, comes back down in order to lower the barrel to the ground, and proceeds to untie the strong rope from the tree, not thinking that at this point the barrel now weighs about 4 times more than George. And as soon as he untied that rope, the barrel comes down and George goes up. And they meet about halfway between the second story and the ground. And the barrel slams into his shoulder, bumps his hip, strikes his kneecap. He continues up, the barrel continues down, it lands on the ground, and as soon as it lands on the ground, the bottom falls out because of the heavy bricks. And George strikes the beam that's holding the pulley and cracks his skull. Well, now, because the bottom is out of the barrel is about 4 times lighter than George. And so immediately, he starts down and the empty barrel starts back up again. And they meet about halfway in between on the opposite side, strikes his opposite hip. His other knee, breaks his nose. He comes all the way down to the ground. The barrel is now at the top of where the pulley is. And of course, the very, very light barrel begins to come down once again because he lets go of the rope. Having hit the ground, he lets go of the rope. And the barrel comes down and lands right on top of him as he had landed on the pile of bricks below him. And there's George laying in the hospital, wondering to himself, should I file just 1 insurance claim or 5? What's the point? Life in this world is one of ubiquitous ambivalence. My apologies to Ruth for that. What I mean by that, it's a life of change. Always changing. We all know, because we've experienced it, life has its ups and its downs. And our balance in life is always being tested. Just when you feel your bucket is full, the bottom falls out. When one problem is resolved, another one takes its place. The peaks and the valleys become the norm, not the exception. and things can and indeed do go wrong. Now, as all of this is true, and again, our life's experiences tell us that it is, the question becomes, how do I keep a positive attitude? How do I find peace and contentment in this life of ubiquitous ambivalence? And the answer to that question is really very simple. But let me also say, applying it to everyday life is not. Sometimes we find an answer, but making it a part of our lives, really applying it to ourselves, that's much, much more difficult in the real world, in the reality of life as it is. The answer, the simple answer is we have to adjust our attitude. Adjust it from the negative to the positive. Okay, that's simple. How do we do that? That's easy, right? No, it's not really. Not always. But what it is a choice. It is a choice. We choose to be negative. We choose to be gloomy. We choose to be pessimistic. Or on the other side, we can choose to be positive, upbeat, optimistic people. We must make that choice. Call it personality, call it disposition, whatever you want. It's still a choice. God has given us the ability to make that choice. If we're negative, we can choose to be positive. We can choose to adopt the attitude of Philippians 2 and verse 14, where Paul says, do all things without complaining and grumbling. All things. Look at things from the positive perspective, not the negative. We choose or can choose to do that. Everything we are to ourselves and to others builds from that foundational choice. We will live today, we'll live tomorrow, we'll live the rest of our lives choosing to be positive about life or negative about it. It's not something that's imposed on us. It's something that we do to and for ourselves. It's the reality of Proverbs 23 and verse 7. As a person thinks in his heart, so is he. Now, where's your heart? Well, there's one here that supplies the blood flow to keep the body functioning and to carry out all of the things that the body is necessarily going to do, but there's another heart, and it's right here. And that's the one that the wise Solomon was talking about, because I don't think with this, I think with this. So as the heart thinks, so is the person. And our way of thinking determines our way of living. Our way of thinking determines our way of living. That's Proverbs 4 and verse 23. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. The renowned psychiatrist, Karl Menninger, said, attitudes are more important than facts. Attitudes are more important than facts. You can easily identify people with bad attitudes, can't you? They always seem to be doing what Paul says in Philippians 2:14. They always seem to be complaining. They always seem to be disputing. One man said to a complaining fellow worker of his, "Did you wake up grumpy this morning?" And the man misunderstood the question. He said, "No, I just let her sleep." That wasn't what he was asking. He could tell a bad attitude when he saw it, when he experienced it. But judging someone else's attitude is relatively easy, isn't it? Judging the way someone else feels, we have a good handle on that. Judging our own bad attitude, that's a whole different thing. We don't often recognize or always recognize that. When our attitude is wrong, when our attitude is bad, then nothing is right and nothing is good. We just look at everything from that negative perspective. When I was teaching school, many years ago now, but I know this things still go on today, and it's just gotten worse, but they still go on. We had what were called in-service meetings. And I know that teachers still have to attend in-service meetings. These were supposed to be training sessions. They were supposed to be times when we could learn. But I'll tell you what, the general feeling among us teachers was these are a waste of time. These in-service meetings, they just take up time. I said on many occasions, education is one of the only businesses I know of where they schedule meetings and then they decide afterwards what they're going to talk about, instead of doing it the other way around. But I often would approach those meetings knowing that I wasn't going to get anything out of them, just knowing that it was going to be a waste of my time. And you know what? It generally was. Why? Because the meeting was bad? No. What was bad? My attitude toward it. That's what was bad. And that's why I didn't get anything out of it. Did you ever, before you ever met someone, think you weren't going to like them? For whatever reason? Before you even met the person, I'm just not going to like that person. Or there's something that you're going to have to do, and you say, I'm not going to like it. I don't care what it is. I'm not going to like it. Well, what do you mean? You're already predisposed. You're already predisposed to be negative. You've already decided in your heart that you're going to be negative about whatever this is or whoever this is. And you were indeed, just as I was with the meetings, you were confirmed in your judgment. Not again because the individual that you met was not good, not indeed because where you were going or what you were doing was boring, but because you'd already made up your mind. You chose to be negative. We make that choice. We can choose to be negative. Paul tells us in Philippians 2 just the opposite. He says in Philippians 2, choose to be positive. Why, Paul? Well, number one, because we can't please God with a negative attitude. We can't be pleasing to God with a negative approach. And number two, we can't be effective disciples for Christ with such an attitude, because it is discernible among people. In the Gospel of Mark, there's a story that really illustrates the power of a predisposition, the power of the mind being predisposed to something, being preset, and how attitude indeed determines action. Go back to Mark chapter 7 and look there beginning at verse 24. From there he, meaning Jesus, arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and wanted no one to know it, but he could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, meaning a Gentile, a non-Jew, a Syro-Phoenician by birth. And she kept asking Jesus to cast the demon out of her daughter. She persisted in this. Jesus at first did not answer her. And she kept asking him. But Jesus then said to her, verse 27, let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. And she answered and said to him, yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs. Then he said to her, for this saying, go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter. And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out and her daughter lying on the bed. Here we have the only recorded instance in the Gospels when Jesus' ministry went beyond the boundaries of Palestine. Tyre and Sidon, the two towns, the two cities that are mentioned there in the text, were the principal cities of ancient Phoenicia, and were among the most distinguished of urban areas in the ancient world, dating back to as early as the 15th century BC. Now, the Phoenicians themselves were a people of considerable achievements, said to have invented the alphabet, developed a great skill at navigation, developed navigation to a very high level, and to have been skillful manufacturers of metal objects and textile fabrics, and even a purple dye that was obtainable from the shells, from seashells. That, by the way, is the dye that Lydia sold back in Acts 16, the seller of purple. That was the kind of dye, and it was very rare and very expensive, that she dealt with. Hiram, the king of Tyre, had aided Solomon in the building of the great temple in Jerusalem. He'd provided materials for Solomon to complete, and also workmen, as a matter of fact, craftsmen, for Solomon to complete the great temple. So Jesus enters this house. Jesus enters the house of an unnamed person, and he wants to keep his presence there quiet. Wherever Jesus went, there were crowds. They always were putting upon him. He attracted so much attention because, obviously, word of mouth is the best advertisement that anybody could get or anybody could have, and people wanted to see and be near this man that they'd heard about. So he couldn't keep his presence a secret. He couldn't keep it just a private matter. And a Syrophoenician woman, a Gentile, not a Jew, but a Gentile. That's, as I said, what the word Greek means in the text. Comes to him. She comes to him as a mother concerned about her daughter. And she asked Jesus to cast a demon out of her daughter. She's possessed of a demon spirit, an evil spirit. And Jesus, won't you do this? Won't you make her well? And at first, Jesus does not respond to the woman, does not respond to her request. But you notice what she does. She persisted. She didn't give up. And she continued to ask him, help my child. Now, if you go to the account of this story in Matthew, Mark doesn't mention this, but in Matthew 15, verse 23, Jesus' disciples wanted to send the woman away so that she stopped bothering the master. Mark doesn't tell us that, but Matthew tells us. They wanted her to be sent out of the house. Stop bothering Jesus. But Jesus finally responds to her. And again, the account in Matthew gives his direct response to the woman. I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I came first and foremost for the Jews. You're not a Jew. But the woman remained respectful, and she certainly remained determined. She wasn't going to be denied when it was her daughter's life at stake. And then you get that verse 27, where Jesus says, let the children be filled first. And he's talking about the Jews, the children of Israel. Let the children be filled first. For it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. What's the woman's response to this? How does she react? She says, yes, Lord, but even the little dogs under the table do get the crumbs that fall. Give me a crumb. Give me a crumb. Jesus knew this persistent woman's heart. He knew her attitude. He knew her disposition. He'd made his point about his purpose in the world. And she'd made her point about her desire for her daughter. But what was the turning point here in this whole thing was her attitude. Because she believed. She believed that Jesus could help her. She believed that Jesus could help her daughter. And she was not going to be discouraged or ignored. She was not predisposed to be negative. She was predisposed to be positive. He can't help me. And he can help my daughter. And I'm not going to give up getting that help. And her persistent attitude, her positive attitude, her confidence in Jesus paid off there in verse 29. For this saying, because you have persisted, because you have believed, go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter. And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out of her daughter, and her daughter lying on the bed. In a poem by Ella Wheeler Wilcox, the truth about the power of predisposition is also found. She said, one ship sails east and another west, while the selfsame breezes blow. 'Tis the set of the sail and not the gale that bids them where they go. As the winds of the air are the ways of fate, as we voyage along through life, 'tis the set of the soul that decides our goal and not the storm and strife. And the Apostle Paul expressed that same thought, in different words, but expressed that same thought in Philippians 4 and verse 11. I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. That's a mindset. That's a predisposition. Yes, I've learned that, but I've also, Paul says, decided that. I've learned it. I've decided that in whatever situation I find myself, I'm going to look for the positive. And that's quite a statement coming from someone who had been forced to leave many towns and cities, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes, in one instance, dragged out and stoned by the inhabitants of that town, severely beaten at times, imprisoned. And for someone who has gone through all of this to say, I still can be content, I still can think positively, that's a tall order. That's not an easy thing. Paul says he could still be at peace within himself. He may not be at peace with the people around him because they objected to what he was doing. They objected to what he believed, to what he taught. But he said, I can be at peace with myself. And I can be at peace with God in spite of all these outward circumstances. Why? Because of his attitude. And because of his certainty of the love and the care of a powerful and a merciful God. I believe, though, of all the biblical examples of the power of predisposition, of attitudes or actions, there's none that stands out more than of the elder brother in Jesus' parable of the wayward or self-willed son in Luke chapter 15. And having taught on that subject extensively at different times, I have come to the conclusion that the whole story is really about the elder brother. We call it the parable of the prodigal son, the parable of the lost son. And certainly he takes up a good bit of the story, his relationship with his father, what happens to him and he leaves his home, and with his inheritance, how he reaches the very bottom of what life apparently could give, and then comes back home. But the real heart of the story is the attitude of the elder brother. Whenever I teach parables, I always talk about the fact that you have to look at the context of the story. Why did Jesus tell the story? Because he always had a reason. He never told stories just to entertain. He never told stories just because it was a way to catch people's attention, although indeed it was a method of teaching that did get people's attention. He told them because he had a purpose in telling them. In this particular case, the story was aimed, as were the previous two, about the lost coin and the lost sheep, at the religious leadership of the Jews, the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. He was telling this parable to and about them. And the elder brother represents them and their attitude, their very negative attitude toward him, toward his followers, toward the whole idea that he could be the Messiah, that he could be the one that the prophets had promised. Now, as much as the younger son's disrespectful attitude changed toward his father and even changed toward himself, so equally the self-righteous older brother's attitude refused to change. He refused to change his mind regarding his lost brother. In his negative attitude, and that's what it was a very negative attitude, he was also disrespectful to his father. And he was unresponsive to the pleas of his father to change his mind about his brother and his brother's repentance coming home. And so long as the older brother chose to be negative, and it was his choice, as long as he chose to be negative, he was standing outside apart from the celebration. Remember, he wouldn't go in. His father had to come out and talk to him. The servant said, the other older brother is here, because the father had asked about him. Where's the brother? Where's my other son? Oh, he's outside. He won't come in. And so the father goes and talks to him. But he's standing out there, and he's standing very firmly on what he believes is his righteous foundation. I'm right about this. Everyone else is wrong. And he felt he was right in his thinking, but actually his thinking was very wrong. You can learn a great deal about someone by analyzing or just listening to their complaints. You can learn a lot about people just by listening to the things that bother them, the things they're complaining about. So let's analyze what the older brother is thinking here in Luke 15 and what it says and what it means about him and about us. First of all, he says to his father, "Look how many years I've served you. Look what I've done for you. I've been an obedient child. I've worked long and hard all these years. I didn't run away. I didn't abandon you. I stayed here and I made sure that things got done. And you apparently don't appreciate me. You don't appreciate what I've done. You don't appreciate my faithfulness." Because he resents his father giving this, what he sees as preferential treatment, to his younger brother. He sees his father as being both unjust and unfair to him. He simply ignores the fact that all that he has is because of his father. Remember when the younger son left, that both of the sons received their inheritance? Now, he'd not asked for it, but the father very fairly, very justly, and as a matter of fact, as the older son, he would have received more than the younger brother did, because that was the law. The older son would have gotten more. He probably would have gotten as much as 2/3 of the inheritance, as opposed to 1/3 for his younger brother. The father had not at all been unfair to him. The father had been very generous with him. And even though he'd not asked for it, he was given the inheritance. But once again, the older brother says, I've never broken your rules. I've always obeyed you. I'm your good son. Oh, there's that self-righteousness. I'm your good son, the obedient son. And I never broke your heart like that younger brother of mine did. I never did that. I saw you sitting out there day after day. I saw you watching and waiting for him. I never did that to you. And because of this, he feels very justified in resenting what's going on, resenting his brother. Even, although he wouldn't have admitted it, resenting his father. That's what his attitude says. He resents his father for even welcoming this son back home. He should have turned him away. He should have said, I gave you your inheritance, you left, you can't come back. That's how the older brother saw it. And then he goes on, once again, complaining, grumbling. He goes on to say, you never gave a feast like this for me and my friends. You never killed the fatted calf for me. You never had me invite all my friends over for a celebration. You never rewarded me for being such an obedient and good child. Question: would that have made him happy? Would that really have made the older brother happy? I doubt it with his negative attitude, because he didn't want to be happy. And finally he says, now this son of yours. Notice that? This son of yours. It's like at home when a child acts up. Do you ever notice it becomes your child? Either husband or wife? Do you notice what your son did? Do you notice what your daughter did? The R goes out of it. O-U-R goes out of it. Yeah, he says to the father, look, this is your son, not my brother, your son. He comes home and look what you do for him. Look what you give him. And don't expect me to say everything is forgiven and welcome home to such a situation, to such a sinner. This older brother is totally self-centered. He's totally self-absorbed. I served. I obeyed. You never gave such a feast for me. No love, that's his problem. No concern for anyone else, not even his father, that's his sin. And with his negative attitude, he would never have enjoyed the feast anyway. I could just picture if he had come in, can't you see him standing over in the corner with his arms folded and kind of a scowl on his face and just looking at everything through narrowed eyes? Everything was bad. Even if he'd come in, he wouldn't have enjoyed himself. Because of what? Right there. because of his thinking, because of his attitude. With a negative attitude, we can't please God. And we certainly don't enjoy his blessings for us. We don't enjoy the blessings that he gives us. Remember, I said the Father was very generous with this young man. He didn't see it that way. All he could see was what he didn't get, not what he had. Sometimes we're too caught up in scowling about everyone and everything else to really enjoy what God has provided for us. Are we that older brother? Do we choose to be negative, or, as Paul tells us in Philippians, do we choose to be positive? Because things are going to go wrong. No question about it. Sometimes big things. Things are going to go wrong. Because that's the way life is. We can't escape it. We can't avoid it. It's just the way life is. There are problems to be solved. There are tragedies to be endured. But above all, there are blessings to be received. How do we see ourselves in relation to God? Do we choose to be negative, or do we choose to be positive? Look what God has done to me, or look what God has given me. Look what I've received. Even when the circumstances, when the situation is not good. It's up to us to choose to be positive. It was up to the Apostle Paul. It's up to us to choose to be positive. And God has given us the way, not only to be positive, but also to be successful. And once again, it's a matter of how you define that word success. Our culture defines it in terms of material gain. A person who's successful is a person who has a nice car, a nice house, all the things that our economy, our productivity can provide. Is that the way God measures success? I don't really think so. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I have never yet been in a place where a person died and there was a real concern on the part of the person dying about their material possessions. At that point, they don't make a bit of difference. And at that moment when the person is dying, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference to the family. Now, there may be some fussing going on later, but right then it doesn't make any difference. What makes a difference is, how do you stand with God? Why could Paul be the way he was? It wasn't because he was an exceptional person. It's because he knew something. And he kept that something always in his mind. I have my soul secure with God. And as long as I have that, it doesn't make any difference what happens to me. It doesn't make any difference what people do to me. It doesn't make any difference what I don't have. I have my soul secure with God. That's the most positive thing we could imagine. Do you have that? Have you confessed Jesus as your Lord and Savior? Have you expressed a desire to turn from sin and turn to God? Have you been baptized, immersed for the forgiveness of your sins? Because that's choosing the positive over the negative. Maybe it's a matter of restoration. Maybe you've wandered away from that first love. Maybe you need to come back. Choose the positive. We have that choice to make. Every one of us can make it. Nobody else decides for us how we feel, although sometimes we put ourselves in that position. Well, they made me feel this way, or they don't respect me, or whatever it is. No, you decide to be positive. You decide that. And live your life on that basis. Won't you come this morning as we stand and sing?
Hello, my name is Lance Lindenberger, and I'm the pulpit minister with the Northwest Church of Christ in Canton, Ohio. We feel at Northwest we have much to offer, and we certainly, first of all, offer you a warm welcome. We want you to come and visit us. We want you to come and be a part of our services and our Bible study. But we also have activities for all ages. I think you'll find as you come to Northwest that you'll receive, first of all, a very cordial welcome. The people here are very friendly, and they want to welcome visitors, and they want to welcome those who come and explore what the church is all about and what we at Northwest are all about. Also, we have activities for all ages, and certainly for the youngest to the oldest, we have things that will appeal to people. We have things that you can do. It's not just worship and Bible study. There are activities for our children, beginning really with nursery age, and then right on through to our senior citizens. We're especially proud of our senior citizen program, the Golden Agers. They do a lot together. They have meals together, they have Bible study together, we travel to different places. It's quite an experience, and it's quite a fellowship for all those who participate. We'd like you to be a part of the experience at Northwest. Come and visit us at any time. We're located on 38th Street Northwest in Canton, Ohio, and we'd like to see you.